Hello ladies, welcome to Homemaking Radio. I hope you get a lot done while you listen today. I don't have comments on the YouTube channel, but I will provide a link so you can go over to my site where I placed this video. I'm just creating these videos to enhance my own blog, and there are other articles on there that are not videos. And today I have a number of things that I will read to you, and hopefully you can go and get what you need to be doing done while you listen. I'm Mrs. Sherman, and I am a preacher's wife of almost 50 years now, and I am living in the manse. So welcome to the manse, welcome to Homemaker Radio. I talk a little bit about the olden days, but I don't actually live in the olden days. However, today I am wearing a costume, and it's a Regency dress with a little Spencer jacket that I made. I actually knit this myself, so some of you who like to knit, I didn't knit very much after this. I knitted a sweater for my mother, and I knitted one, this one was for my daughter, and I wanted my children to know how to do something, at least make one thing with it, and so this was what I made with and it goes with this dress. So I'm going to get up and try to show you a little bit of this dress, what it looks like. I think the Regency is so pretty from the back, actually. And so this is what this looks like. So I hope that meets with your approval. I'm wearing this today because I thought it might be nice to get out some of the costumes and, you know, freshen them up a little bit, maybe hang them on the line. And this one I had a bit of a problem actually putting on because, as you recall, in the olden days there were no zippers and very few buttons, so things were done with wrapping and with strings pulled through casings, and there was a way to put on something and to make sure you didn't put it on backwards, and this one had a piece in it that wrapped around, and I had forgotten. It's been so long. We used to have Regency tea parties, Victorian tea parties, or other eras in our home when our children were younger, because I wanted them to have a social life, and we invited other families to come and enjoy a tea and maybe a history lesson and just enjoy being together. And so I have some of these costumes still, and today I'd like to show you my teacup, and it is very interesting. It doesn't exactly match this, but it has enough in it. It's beautiful, isn't it? And it's called Elizabethan, and there's no other markings on it. I got it at an antique store. It says Elizabethan fine bone china, made in England, and just wanted you to see the inside here. I always like it. I always think that you get more for your money if you've got a little picture on the inside. And I was thinking today, there's also a sticker on the bottom that I was unable to get off, but someone told me about this stuff. It's called Grandma's Secret Spot Remover, and you can get it at the Walmart sewing department and craft department, and you can get it at Hobby Lobby, and you can get it at Joann's and a number of places. And I was a bit skeptical at first. It's about $4, but I was wearing a pair of gloves the other day, antique gloves from Grandma's collection, and it had the gloves had a little sticker residue on it that some antique store, I guess, had sold it, or maybe someplace she bought it new, had a sticker on it. Remember, they used to attach with a pin a little card on a string with the price, but this had a sticker on it. The sticker had been taken off, and the residue was still there, and this got it out. So I was pleasantly surprised. So what I'm going to do is put some of this on the bottom of the cup and see if I can get that off. It claims it can get stuff off of anything, sticky stuff off of anything. Well, if you're having a little bit of trouble getting started today, and you just kind of feel like you're running around in circles, the first thing I would suggest is you settle your mind by having a cup of tea and making a list. Just list 3 things that you'd like to do today, 3 things you'd like to get done. I listed my 3, and they were, I wanted to hang the laundry on the line outside, and some of you are going into winter, you'll be hanging your laundry inside, and I wanted to also sew some little things that I'm going to give away. I'll tell you about those later, and maybe post them on my blog, something probably that you could do too. And there was one other thing, that was clean the refrigerator. I usually create a self-cleaning method where every time I open that door, I check everything. I push it around. I take something out. I test it all to see, smell it, see, and just keep that clean. And then I have my little vinegar spray and some paper towels, and I clean the surfaces in there and clean the little shelves. But it has caught up to me lately because we have been on the go, and we've had so much to do. And we eat at home, so I do a lot of food preparation, and I'm just, always up to the minute trying to get things ready, and I just have neglected that. So today I hope I can do that. And I'm going to plant a few things outside, and so I've got that list made. And so while I was having my hot cup of tea and making that list, I felt my brain quit whirling around, and I felt a little more settled down. And I hope that this video will help you feel that way too. And there isn't anything to watch here, so you can go on and do what you want. But I am going to read to you a few things. And I want to talk a little bit about your appearance, because after you've had your cup of tea and made your list, please, please go and get dressed. In fact, the night before, iron your outfit. Now, I wear a lot of cotton, homemade cotton clothing, and it likes to be ironed, and it looks splendid. It's also great homemaking clothing because cotton is just so wearable in the home, and it also feels so nice. So I don't like too many blends. Cotton is just the all-around best thing, and it wears so well, and it's so sturdy. And so today I would like to talk to you a little bit about getting dressed and getting it ready the night before. Just laying it out, no matter what kind of a mess you're in your house. Maybe you've just moved, there's boxes everywhere, or maybe you've just had some kind of personal family upheaval where emergencies, and you've had to go to some event, or just get that outfit ready. Just get it, hang it up in the bathroom, and get ready the next morning, and get dressed, and just put all that mess out of your mind and get dressed. Then tackle it, because if you start looking at that mess, that's going to just knock you over mentally. And so just get ready first, and be a little dignified about it, and tackle it as though it were a business. If you were in a business and you had to put some shipment away, you would have that all neatly put aside, even though it's not put away, and you would have a time to do that, and you would be doing it in between other things, in between serving customers. Well, that's the way it is at home, isn't it? In between meal preparation, in between clothing treatment, and keeping everybody clean, and then you do some of your bigger jobs in between, if you possibly can. Well, today I thought that it might be nice to show you something that I recently purchased. This, I'll tell you what this is. It's a picnic blanket. And I will say that the one nation I know that does the best picnics are Australians. They even have picnic businesses where you can order everything you need, and they give it to you in a box, and you take it somewhere, and then you return everything. But this is something that we have needed here. I'm surprised it's taken people so long to invent this. But what it is, it's a picnic. We used to just throw our quilt on the ground, but I was going to the dollar store and getting a couple of shower curtains for $1 and just throwing them, or some of those plastic tablecloths that's just absolutely useless, throwing those on the ground, and then putting my favorite blanket on top. But I never liked it because the blanket always drew some kind of dampness. And so look at this. This is just beautiful, and it's a woven. It feels like a wool almost. And look at the other side, totally, and it's padded, so it's like it's got something in between that makes it soft. And isn't this just wonderful? And if you are wanting a picnic indoors, you can put it on the floor, and this side is the side that's going to be affected by the ground or the floor. So I am just thrilled with this, and it rolls up and has these little, years ago, it has these little straps that wrap around it with Velcro and hold it together. And years ago, I found a magazine that had a picnic blanket that you could make, and the corners had pockets in it, and in the pockets you would put your plates and utensils and your napkins, and but it was a complicated way to roll it up, and I never did get figure out how to do it. And sometimes people would sell them in stores. They'd home make them and sell them in stores, and still you'd have to have a number on each corner as to which fold would go first to get that thing to roll up, and then they had these straps on the outside that would tie it, and I just loved it. I don't know what I've done with the magazine that had the pattern, but I'd kind of like to try it again. It was actually charming, and it was with cotton, was a patchwork quilt is what it looked like. So ladies, I wanted to share that with you, and also if you want to get started on your list, I will read to you a little bit about this and that and the other thing, and since I'm dressed historically, then we will do some history. And this is a book I might have told you about before. It's called In the Garden with Jane Austen by Kim Wilson. She's the one that wrote the book Tea with Jane Austen, and there were two books I think I got everyone a little confused about, but one was written by someone else. They were both called Tea with Jane Austen. But this one is called In the Garden with Jane Austen. Now, of course, I don't know how historically correct this is, but you know what? Sometimes I like to read just for the pleasure, and I get it. They're just showing us, it might not be absolutely historically correct, but at least they're giving us pictures of some of the gardens, and I liked especially the ironwork and the fact that this one particularly has a fence you can look through, and now we're getting to where we can find more of these things inexpensively for our own little places. And I noticed Hobby Lobby had some just little iron fences, and they were white, and you could just stick them in. Had a little place you could stick them in the ground, and so that anybody could do it, anybody could own it. And I can remember years ago the frustration of wanting one of these cute little gardens or walking gardens, and there wasn't anything available, or only the very rich could have something like that. And so we ended up with our little cottage gardens and no embellishments in them. But now things are getting better, aren't they? And I have a little garden table out there. I have a little bench and several things, a little flag, and so I'll take you out there someday when I learn how to videotape and make. That's an old-fashioned word. I don't really say that anymore, do they? To show you a home tour if I can ever get everything together at once. So I wanted to read to you a little bit about this place called Chawton House, and I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce it. I've had my DNA done, and I'm just British, apparently, and have a lot of British cousins, but I don't know how to pronounce anything in Britain, and I live in Oregon, and my family has been here in the United States since the 1700s or 1600s, when Jamestown plantation began, and we were from, our family was from the Ulster plantation in Northern Ireland, and so I haven't kept up with how things are pronounced, but this is called Chawton House, or they might have pronounced it Chawton, I don't know. Chawton House, a warm brick house dating to Elizabethan times. Now, Elizabethan times, that would have, I'm trying to think what the years that would be. Well, you can look that up, can't you? It's an easy stroll from Jane Austen's House Museum. The house, formerly owned by Jane Austen's brother Edward, just want to check this and make sure I've got my volume up. Is now home to the Chawton House Library. The grounds and gardens are currently being carefully restored, mostly to their late 18th and early 19th century appearance. Now there are some drawings in here that draw out the gardens to see how they were. I always liked doing that. When I was younger, we didn't have, now of course here in the USA we don't have these ancient historical buildings in every place, maybe down in Alexandria, Florida or something like that, but not up north. And so even though there are houses that date back 100 years, maybe 200 years, not much more than that. And so we like to look at these books or go to museums and see some of the postcard pictures and books that were written about the gardens. Garden features at Chawton House include a walled kitchen garden, a lime avenue. What would a lime avenue be? Would that be lime sprinkled on a pathway? They use a lot of lime here because it rains so much. A fernery and a wilderness. A fernery, that's interesting. And a wilderness. Well, I wouldn't have any trouble with that, would I? Because in a wilderness, when you live in a wilderness, everything grows when you don't want it to. It grows between the cracks in the cement and the sidewalk, and if you've got a little brick garden, it'll grow out the bricks. It'll grow everywhere. Grass will grow everywhere. Everything will grow there. Self-guided tours of the garden may be taken on weekdays. Guided tours of the house and library are available on certain days each month. Booking ahead is recommended. So, but I believe they probably have some of these tours filmed on YouTube if you want to go and see them. So, a park, a real park. Every park has its beauty and its prospects, Jane Austen tells us. Many of the great estates in her novels are parks: Norland Park, Barton Park in Sense and Sensibility, Netherfield Park, and Rosings Park in The Pride and Prejudice, and Mansfield Park in the novel of the same name. Mansfield, one day to be inherited by Tom Bertram, is smaller than Pemberley, though would be still considered quite large. Worldly Mary Crawford, contemplating marriage with Tom, is impressed. And so, there's a quote from one of Jane Austen's novels. Miss Crawford soon felt that he and his situation might do. She looked about her with due consideration, found almost everything in his favor. A park, a real park, 5 miles round, a spacious modern-built house, so well placed and well screened as to deserve to be in any collection of engravings of gentlemen's seats in the kingdom, and wanting only to be completed and newly furnished. So I thought that was an interesting book. I won't read all of it to you. I have quite a bit to read to you today. So if you have something that you need to fold, that you need to sort, that you need to get out of the way, and you need to clear out, or if you need to clean your kitchen, which I found to be the most tedious, is to clean the kitchen. But if I can listen to something, it makes the time go more swiftly. And what is it? It was an expression we used to use. It makes the time short. That was the expression we used to use. Now, last time I saw you, I was reading from the Old World History and Geography book. Now, keep in mind there is the New World History and Geography book too. And there were a couple of things I had started out with called the Fertile Crescent. And so I wanted to tell you why I began there, because the Fertile Crescent is also where the Garden of Eden was. So this book wisely begins at the Cradle of Civilization. And children loved this book. I would suggest you just get one for your child, and maybe one for yourself if you want. But don't pay much attention to the questions and things at the back. You can read them and everything, but don't use them as authority or tests, because the idea with homeschooling is to love, to learn, and to enjoy it, and not to make it a grueling job. Like Emma said, there's a grueling job to be done. And to make it delightful for you and your family. And don't imitate the way that teaching has traditionally gone on, but tailor it to the needs of your own family, and to win the hearts of your children. And of course, they naturally love you, but to keep their trust in you, that you are a loving teacher. And that's one of the big differences between sending them out for someone else to teach and you teaching them. But at the same time, you have to realize these books are teaching them too, and they're written by someone else, and there will be some things that, unfortunately, children will use as authority instead of the parents. And so you have to be very careful to know that a book is just a book, and it's a tool, and it's flawed. The only perfect book, of course, is the Bible, but the children have to realize that the parents are the guide. And so I want to just read a little bit of this, and it's the same with me. Just because I'm reading it to you doesn't mean that you have to take it all completely as authority. You can look it up and you can research it yourself. I'm going to read to you more about the Fertile Crescent, which I read the last time. So we talked about the Tigris means arrow, and the Euphrates means that which makes fruitful, and those were the two rivers running in a crescent shape, I guess, around this piece of land. And so we started with that, and that was the first civilization, and it was called the Cradle of Civilization, and there was a lot of fertile soil there. The land between the rivers. The part of the Fertile Crescent between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers was called Mesopotamia. Now you remember Mesopotamia was mentioned in Genesis, which means between the rivers. The Bible, which is our only completely accurate record of ancient, very old history, names 4 rivers which came together at the Garden of Eden, Genesis 2:10 through 14, where God placed the first man and woman. One of these rivers was the Euphrates. Another was the Hiddekel, which began in Assyria, is believed by many Bible scholars to be the ancient name of Tigris. The other 2 rivers have never been found. Many people think they disappeared during the flood of Noah's day. The Garden of Eden was probably located in Mesopotamia, where the country of Iraq is today. For a long time, the Bible was our only record of what early life in Mesopotamia was like. In recent years, men have found other records of early times, but none is as accurate as the Bible. Now, if you remember Mesopotamia, no, I don't think it was Mesopotamia. Well, I'll just not get ahead of myself here. And I also wanted to mention that these books, this is an A. Becker book, have these beautiful, beautiful, beautiful maps in them, which show geographical and political states, etc. See how colorful and beautiful they are? But it's always wise to get a globe so they can see where everything is in relation to everything else, not just by page. So I want to talk to you about the Ur of the Chaldees. You remember Abraham came from the Ur of the Chaldees. That's near where this is. And he was called out of his country by God because he was going to make him a special people. Can you imagine? You all who feel so isolated, can you imagine what it would have been like to have been Abraham being called out of his country and away from his own kindred to start something new and to a land which he had not even seen. And he went by faith. Hebrews said he went by faith. He hadn't even seen it, and he went. So I want to read to you a little bit about the circle of the earth, because this is where they put it in here, and I don't know why it's put in that position exactly. Perhaps because you're going to run into that later on. Okay. God has given the earth to make a home for man. Geography is the study of the surface of the earth, its land, mountains, water, air, as well as its plants, animals, and people. You know, as I use the word water, I noticed something in being interested in speech and spelling and pronunciation and stuff. I've seen a lot of people on videos say Americans pronounce water, W-A-D-D-R. We don't. We roll our tongue a little bit when we say it, so that it comes out sounding like a D, but it's not. We don't say water. We say water, and our tongue rolls a little bit on the roof of our mouth. And so, well, we don't say water like the like other people do. We say water, but it isn't a D. So God has given the earth to make a home for man. Geography is the study of the surface of the earth, its land, its mountains, air, and water, as well as plants, animals, and people. Geography helps us to understand history because it tells us about the places where history occurred. The Bible tells us that God created the earth and all its beauty around us. The orderliness, the planning, and wisdom that went into God's creation of the earth fill us with wonder. The earth and its land, oceans, rivers, plants, and animals were created perfectly with a special purpose in mind, the creation of man. That is so interesting. If you study Genesis, if you read Genesis and you see all the things that were created first, the earth was getting ready. It was like placing things in ready and building an area for man to exist. I thought that was very interesting. The description of the earth that the Bible gives us is our first written record of the geography of the earth. Okay, here's the quote from Isaiah 40, verse 22. It is he that sitteth upon the circle of the earth. Isaiah 40, verse 22. Now, of course, I've told you, in the Bible, it uses figures of speech and expressions to bring out the meaning of things. So it's not that someone's literally sitting on the earth. It is a figure of speech, which we will find out means more than meets the eye. He stretches out the north over the empty place and hangeth the earth upon nothing. Job 26, verse 7. If you look at a picture of the earth taken from a satellite, you can quickly see that the earth is round or in the shape of a ball. A round ball is called a sphere. The earth is a huge sphere of land and water with air around it on all sides. It is not a perfect sphere, for it is slightly flattened at the North Pole and the South Pole. Most of the land is rock, but the surface of the land is covered in most places by a fine layer of gravel, sand, or soil. Even the bottom of the ocean is mostly rock. Most of the plants that we depend on for food grow in the layer of soil above the rock. Now, I know rocks, I live in a rocky area. This used to be a riverbed, and it dried up, and the river changed course in the 1800s. So when we do a garden or mow the lawn, there's always a lot of rocks coming up, and rocks are actually filled with water. And so if you want to put a fire out, you've got a campfire going, you just throw rocks on it. And so rocks. And I wish I had brought my book, Painting on Rocks, and I will do that next time, because there was one year here when it was so dreary. The summer was dreary, the winter was dreary, there were no flowers of any interest, and we would go for long walks and find nothing. So finally I said, well, let's just get what we can and bring it home, because we went on nature walks and we had to bring something home. So we chose rocks that had a certain shape that looked like something and brought them home and painted them. And I painted an English cottage on one, and I'll show that to you sometime. And we have several books on how to paint with rocks. Most of the plants that we depend on for food grow in the layer of soil above the rock. In some places, the bare rock comes to the surface. Nearly all deep mines are in firm rock, and in these mines are found most of the coal, iron, ore, copper, gold, oil, and other minerals useful to man. The diameter of the earth, or the distance from side to side through the center, is nearly 8,000 miles, 13,000 kilometers. The circumference, or the greatest distance around the earth, is about 25,000 miles, 40,000 kilometers. The earth is about 8,000 miles through the center, about 25,000 miles around. Now, if you are a gardener or you just like to have a potted plant once in a while, you'll notice that in order to create your potted plant, you'll have to put some rocks in the bottom because it gives it room for drainage, and it keeps the soil from becoming hard and packed, and makes the plant's roots healthy. So I thought that would be an interesting thing to read to you. And So next time we'll talk about the creation of man, and now I'm going to go on to something else. Now, several of you have mentioned my quotes from Wives and Daughters, and I do have that book, Wives and Daughters. As a matter of fact, I keep thinking, I cannot look for books and buy more books at Thrift Books or the other thrifty bookstore where, now Thrift Books is only 99 cents for postage, and so I find that better, and many of them are new. But I look through these books and think, I just cannot I've got to get rid of this book habit. I cannot buy another book. I cannot bring another book into this house. And as I'm going through them and cleaning them up and trying to categorize them, I realize what a job I made for myself. And if you homeschooled, of course, there was just no end. This was before the internet anyway, so we just got our knowledge and our instructions to do anything from a book. And now, of course, you can find anything you want on somebody telling you how to make something or do something on the web. And but ours was with books. But I found one more series that I'm very curious about, and that's the Misread books. Someone told me about that years ago, and since then a lot of people have told me about that. And I noticed Thrift Books had one, so I might get one more, and hopefully dig myself out of this mess before I become disabled in some way and everybody else has to do it. So that's my goal, is to keep my family from having to clean up these books. So today I'm going to read a little bit about Wives and Daughters, but I want to talk to you a little bit about it first, because and why I enjoyed it so much. As a matter of fact, as I read through the book, I noticed the videos that were made were actually quite accurate, and even the conversation and the script was very, very good compared to the book. Were just about perfect. And one thing that I liked is the video had such lovely country backgrounds. I particularly liked, there was one scene where Roger was riding his horse on the way to see, I don't know, it was Cynthia or Molly, somebody, and he cut some roses off of a hedgerow. And I just thought that was a pretty background, pretty scene. A lot of the scenes, they're so carefully done, and of course I love the costumes. Many of them were like the one I'm wearing. I don't wear Regency or that style from her era very well, preferring the Victorian, but I loved the little prints and cottons. And basically what the story is about is, it starts out pretty much the way the film did. A young girl named Molly, whose mother has passed away, and Molly has already, I guess in a way, suffered a loss. She doesn't have a mother, but she has a wonderful father, Dr. Gibson, a country doctor that makes house calls. You know what? I lived while there was still house calls. And I remember several house call doctors back in the 1950s before it was completely phased out. There's something else that I lived before. I was thinking of it last night and forgot to write it. If I don't write it down, it just makes itself wings, flies right out of my head, whatever I'm thinking. So she has already grown up at a disadvantage, and she's around, I believe, 10 or 11 years old, and this is how it opens up, is that she doesn't have a mother, and but she adores her father. They spend a lot of time together, and they prepare food together, eat together, and try to share their lives as much as they can together. But then her father decides that as she's growing older, he can't supply all the needs that a young girl would have growing up, especially now she's becoming a young woman, and there's going to be other things that he might have to deal with, so he decides that she needs a mother, and he gets married again. And she feels a terrible loss. So here's the second loss she has. She's lost her father, and she didn't really lose him, but she feels that she has, and she says, "You don't know what we were to one another." And I never thought that he might want to get married again. He had me, and so here's a loss. But she has a fortitude in her and a strength of character that can overcome it and cope with it. And she has a goodness in her that carries her along. And I think this is very, very important because in any crisis, we should be, and I particularly feel this way, that in any crisis, I tend to be a little stronger. Then that's when I think I'm needed. That's when I think that maybe I can do something. Is in a crisis, and but a lot of people in a crisis tend to uh, tend to have meltdowns or wane, whatever you want to call it. And but she doesn't. She has this strength and fortitude of character that, and I often would go to antique stores back in the olden days and look at pictures of the they'd have black and white pictures there of the Victorian women, sometimes standing in front of their houses, and wondering what kept them so determined and so focused and so accomplished in their homes and gardens and in the focus they had on raising their family and the duty they felt. In fact, that was the thing that came out to me most about the Victorian people was duty. Duty required them to build a house for their family. Duty required them to plant a garden. Duty required them to focus on their babies and nurture them and heal them. And duty required them uh, to be loyal to their families. And duty required them to sew and cook and do these. Even if they didn't sew or cook, they made sure that it got done by someone else. And so this Molly, when I was reading it, gave me the impression of a child that already had her personality embedded with duty. And it could be because her father was a doctor who not only uh, supplied medicine and healing to people, but also was able to, like Molly said, sometimes Papa can make the last struggle easier. Just by, it's a great comfort to the family, she said. So she impressed me from the very start as a young girl, as someone who just resolutely went on with who she was and with her duty, in spite of what was happening. Well, then the new mama has a daughter who's the same age as Molly, and she eventually comes to live with them. And Molly, before this, has been sent to help Mrs. Hamley at Hamley Hall, uh, who is sick in bed and just needs the company and needs another woman around and needs other things, maybe to have her read to her or to help her in some way. So her father lets her go there and stay. And in this home, Mrs. Hamley has two sons. They're around the age of Molly and Cynthia, Cynthia being the stepdaughter, and Molly gets her life is enriched by these two young men who share their lives with her, and Roger especially, who's interested in bees and bugs and beetles. And she said that she thought he was a very interesting young man because he gave her a wasp nest once for a birthday present, or something like that. So in comes Cynthia, the stepdaughter, and the daughter of Hyacinth, who has married her father. And Cynthia is all charming and silly and attracts Roger, who uh, loses his head over this silly girl, not realizing she hasn't got any depth. She doesn't have strength of character. She doesn't have any focus. And kind of Molly feels that that friendship with him has been sabotaged, and so she has another loss. So here she's lost her mother, and in a way lost her father. Now she's lost her good friend Roger, but she still stays very steady to her own upbringing and her own character. I think that is so remarkable. And so, she just goes through one loss after another, but she makes friends with Mrs. Hamley, Roger's mother, and she loves her like a mother. And Mrs. Hamley dies, so she loses Mrs. Hamley. Now, Elizabeth Gaskell didn't like to end any book on it always had to have a happy ending. She was she believed in happy ending. I think she was a minister's daughter. I'm not sure much about these people. I'm sure there are a lot of stories written at the time, but this was published, and that's why it's the easiest thing. I'm sure there are a lot of people told wonderful stories. This is certainly not the only one coming out of that era. But I wanted to talk about it because a lot of people have seen the video series, Wives and Daughters, which is very well done. And I particularly like the costume in Wives and Daughters. And so Mrs. Hamley dies. Molly has to go home, and there's the stepmother who is a bit difficult to get along with. And so eventually Roger comes to realize that Cynthia, that his infatuation with Cynthia is just a boyish imagination, and it really isn't based on anything depth or true. And there's a disease that's going around. This is an appropriate time to talk about this, and I forget what it's called, but it was similar to scarlet fever. And so Roger, who has finally gotten over Cynthia, comes to, and of course, before this is towards the end, but in the rest of it has very good quality, worth reading. That doesn't have anything to do with Cynthia, but Cynthia, she has her good points, you know. It's just that she's raised more in a high society, and so her idea of life is parties, balls, and attention from people, and popularity. And Molly is more of a country girl who just wants a long-lasting friendship with people, and she's very loyal. And so the two of them try to get along with one another. But Cynthia, of course, is more, I would say, more interesting, and they did a very good job on the film showing this. But like I say, I see a lot of other things in it. Every time I watch it, I see something different. Every time I listen to it. So I want to read part of this because I have talked about it so much, and this is towards the end, where Roger has realized that he's made a terrible mistake showing so much attention to Cynthia. And so here's what happens as he goes to Molly's father. And he said, and Roger has been sent to a scientific excursion on a ship to Africa, and will be gone for 2 years. And he said, and apparently has come back to see Mr. Gibson for permission to renew his friendship with Molly. So here's what he says. "You know that I set off next Tuesday, Mr. Gibson, don't you?" said Roger a little abruptly. "Of course. I hope you'll be as successful in all your scientific objects as you were the last time, and have no sorrows awaiting you when you come back." "Thank you," said Roger. "Yes, I hope so. You don't think there's any danger of infection now, do you?" In his house, Roger's sister-in-law's little boy had gotten a fever, and so Mr. Gibson had told Molly she couldn't go back over there for a while because of this fever. And so Roger asked Mr. Gibson, "You don't think there's any danger of infection now, do you?" "No," said Mr. Gibson. "If the disease were to spread throughout the household, I think we should have had some signs of it before now. One is never sure, remember, like with scarlet fever." Roger was silent for a minute or two. "Should you be afraid," he said at length, "of seeing me at your house?" "Thank you," said Mr. Gibson, "but I think I would rather decline the pleasure of your society there at present. It's only 3 weeks or a month since the child began with the fever. Besides, I shall be over here again before you know it. I'm always on my guard against symptoms of dropsy. I have known it supervene." "Then I shall not see Molly again," said Roger in a tone and with a look of great disappointment. Mr. Gibson turned his keen, observant eyes upon the young man, and looked at him in as penetrating a manner as if he had been beginning with an unknown illness, like a doctor would. Then the doctor and the father compressed his lips and gave vent to a long, intelligent whistle. "Whew," he said. Roger's bronzed cheeks took a deeper shade. "You will take a message to her from me, won't you? A message of farewell," he pleaded. "Not I," said the doctor. "I'm not going to be a message carrier between any young man and young woman. I'll tell my womenkind I forbade you to come near the house, and that you're sorry to go away without bidding goodbye. That's all I shall say. But you do not disapprove? I see you guess why. Oh, Mr. Gibson, just speak to me one word of what must be in your heart, though you are pretending not to understand why I would give worlds to see Molly again before I go." "My dear boy," said Mr. Gibson, more affected than he liked to show, and laying his hand on Roger's shoulder. Then he pulled himself up and said gravely enough, "Mind you, Roger, Molly is not Cynthia. If she were to care for you, she is not one who would transfer her love to the next comer." "You mean not as readily as I have done," replied Roger. "I only wish you could know what a different feeling this is to my boyish love for Cynthia." "I wasn't thinking of you when I spoke, however, as I might have remembered afterward that you were not a model of constancy. Let us hear what you have to say for yourself now." "Not much," said Roger. "I did love Cynthia very much. Her manners and her beauty bewitched me, but her letters, short, hurried letters, sometimes showing that she really hadn't taken the trouble to read mine through. I cannot tell you the pain they gave me. 12 months' solitude in Africa, in frequent danger of one's life, face to face with death, sometimes ages a man like many years' experience. Since I longed for the time when I should see her sweet face again, and hear her speak. Then the letter at the Cape, and I still hoped. But you know how I found her when I went to have the interview which I trusted might end in the renewal of our relations, engaged to Mr. Henderson. I saw her walking with him in your garden, just as I used to do. I can see the pitying look in Molly's eyes as she watched me. I can see it now. And I could beat myself for being such a blind fool. As to what must she think of me, how she must despise me, choosing this false love. Come, come, Cynthia's not so bad," said Mr. Gibson. "She's a very fascinating, faulty creature." I know. I will never allow anyone to say a word against her. If I called her false, it was because I wanted to express my sense of the difference between her and Molly as strongly as I could. You must allow that. Besides, all I wanted to say was, do you think that Molly, after seeing and knowing how I behaved, as a person so inferior to herself, could ever be brought to listen to me again?" And this is where they quoted him quite well in the movie. "I don't know," said the doctor. "I can't tell. And even if I could, I wouldn't. Only if it's any comfort to you, I may say that my experience has taught me women are queer, unreasoning creatures, and are just as likely not to love a man as who has been throwing away his affection." "Thank you, sir," said Roger. I see you mean to give me encouragement, and I had resolved never to give Molly a hint of what I felt till I returned, and then to try and win her by every means in my power. I determined not to repeat the former scene in the former place in your drawing-room, however I might be tempted, and perhaps after all she avoided me when she was here last." "Now, Roger," said the doctor, "I've listened to you long enough. If you've nothing better to do with your time than to talk about my daughter, I have. When you come back it will be time enough to inquire how far your father would approve of such an engagement." "Well," said Roger, "my father himself urged it on me the other day, but then I was in despair. I thought it was too late." "And what means you are likely of having maintaining a wife? I always thought that point was passed too lightly over when you formed your hurried engagement to Cynthia." "I'm not mercenary," said Dr. Gibson. "Molly has some money independently of me, that she, by the way, knows nothing of, not much, that I can allow her something, but all these things must be left until your return." Roger asked, "Then you sanction my attachment?" "I don't know what you mean by sanctioning it. I can't help it. I suppose losing one's daughter is necessary evil. Still, seeing the disappointed expression on Roger's face, it is but fair for you to say, I'd rather give my child, my only child, remember, to you than to any man in the world. I wish they had put that in the movie. They left that out, and they left you kind of guessing about what Mr. Gibson actually thought. Thank you, said Roger, shaking Mr. Gibson's hand, almost against the will of him. And may I see her just once before I go? So I thought you might like to see how it was written in the book. It's actually, don't know if it was gone over in the language refined any from the time that it was written. I'm not sure if it was, what would you call, abridged. So ladies, I hope that has helped you get something done. And I like to listen to wives and daughters on the video just to hear it. And I do wish that it were recorded on LibriVox with people who had a little bit more fluctuation and expression in their voice. Sometimes it's hard to listen to if anyone has any hint of a monotone, and I've talked to you about that when I talked about speaking. And I'm sure I make all the same mistakes, but I hope you enjoyed that, and if you did, I might read some of the other chapters. So I hope that you got a lot done, and appreciate you coming here, and I'm actually honored if you chose to listen to this. There are other Homemakers Radio on the web if you want to look those up, and there are other places to go if this didn't suit, but I have a surprise for you. I have heard from the famous author, Miss Lily of the Valley, and she has sent me another episode of Pioneer Ribbons. And I don't know how interested you are in this, but of course the pioneer era in America is about Allison on the Oregon Trail. It came much later than Elizabeth Gaskell's novels. Well, she was a contemporary of Charles Dickens, I believe, but she was quite the opposite of him. She liked happy things and happy endings and good characters with good consequences. So this one is called Pioneer Ribbons, and it's episode 6 for you, and Pioneer Pie. She's even made a picture of a pie by Miss Lily of the Valley, and Miss Lily of the Valley has endorsed me. So she has sent me this lovely book about Allison Campbell, and if you want to, you can go through my former posts on my blog where I mentioned in the title episode, whatever, of Pioneer Ribbons. So are you ready for this? I'm just going to read this little book that she sent here. Allison Campbell was using her travel experiences to their full advantage. Each day brought a new land, each hour a new scene, and each minute a unique idea. Her thoughts galloped so quickly she couldn't recall them in time to tell of the wonderful inventions and creations she had mentally created. Although the McNeils were a wagon distance behind the Campbells, Allison Campbell, sometimes trekked more slowly in order to talk to Sam McNeil, Lucinda, and Bethany, the brother and 2 sisters that followed behind. Their conversation was always focused on the life ahead. Each one of them had their own plans and took a turn going into elaborate detail of the house plans, the gardens, the fruit trees, the businesses, and the possible social life they anticipated. Food was also prominent in their discussions. They walked the trails in the fresh air, and that helped their appetite. It also helped the campfire food to taste absolutely divine, even though it was quite plain. And one thing they all agreed was missing: pie. The next morning, Allison woke early and found the family store of flour, lard, salt, and dried apples. She deftly created little pies, easily carried in an apron pocket or anybody's pocket and eaten without a fork. Allison thought the fork was a needless invention. Who needed a fork when every food under the sun could be wrapped in a pie? And the wagon had a unique way of, the wagon, that's talking about her family's wagon, had a unique way of cooking something while it rolled along. And here is a description of how it was cooked. And it looked to me like it was the original slow cooker or crock pot. In a metal bucket filled halfway with rocks heated in the evening fire was placed another metal container with food in it and a lid. But this time, a dozen small pies were put in the little bucket, an old lard bucket. Then this was covered with a lid. Straw was then packed around and on top of the small bucket, and the larger bucket a covering. By morning, some of the food was thoroughly cooked, and Allison loaded up the cooked pies that she had prepared the evening before in this bucket, and filled her apron pocket with a dozen small pies the size of her hand. She was ready to distribute them to her friends on the wagon train, and by midday pie was on everyone's lips, either from having eaten one or hearing of it. Allison mentally listed pies as one of her most successful accomplishments as she walked the Oregon Trail. Thank you, ladies, for tolerating some of these silly stories. But Miss Lily of the Valley is an old friend of mine. I'm obligated to read this to you. So I will talk to you later. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope you got something done. And you can go back to some of my older videos, and they're on a playlist so that you can have a continuous play if you like. And I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope you get yourself out of your mess and get organized, because it'll help your brain to feel more settled. So thank you, and God bless you. See you next time. Bye.